The Imperial Military. By decree of Magnus the Pious, every province and city-state in the Empire must maintain a state or provincial army at its own expense. Together, these regional forces make up the Imperial Army, the force that mans the Empire's fortresses, patrols the Empire's borders, repels the Empire's invaders, and, in many places, acts as local law enforcement. These soldiers are armed with a variety of weapons, the most common being the halberd, the sword, and the spear. As well as having a standing army, the Empire has the ability to call up and use the warships of the Imperial Navy, which are divided amongst the First Fleet and Second Fleet, stationed within the provinces of Reichland and Nordland respectively. In addition, Imperial forces are often supplemented with militia troops that are little better than recruits and more professional mercenaries. Since its existence, the Empire has always been a nation born and bred for war, fighting off foes uncountable with the will, the steel, and the faith of their patriotic citizenry. With an unending chain of constant warfare, the armies of the Empire are brimmed with grizzled veterans of many campaigns, each one led by an even greater man of strength, valor, and heroic leadership. As their nation progressed throughout the centuries, innovations and inventions were re-engineered for the use of warfare, with the armies of the Empire now stockpiled with large quantities of devastating black powder weaponry and the technological marvels of the 25th century. With the need for professional soldiers always on the rise, each Imperial soldier is regularly trained, equipped, and maintained at the expense of the Imperial government. Enlistment in the state troops means enlistment in a full-time profession, where those with skill at arms enlist as basic front-line soldiers. Armies stationed within the richer South are equipped with the finest weaponry and armor available to them by their local government, with standard equipment being comparably superior to those in other national armies. Each regiment has a wide variety of weapons for certain types of engagements, with spears, halberds, and swords being the most common and the most flexible in battle situations. Imperial regiments used as long-range support are often equipped with handguns, crossbows, and longbows, among others. When not in war, Imperial soldiers are required to drill and train on a regular basis in order to build their stamina and deepen their martial abilities when the time for combat soon reappears. Supervised by drill sergeants, these men are harshly instructed in the importance of formation tactics and the need to fight as a cohesive unit capable of lending support to one another in the chaos of the battlefield. Those soldiers not stationed within a campaigning army usually serve as guards, acting as the local city watch, fire watch, and enforcers of the law, patrolling the streets or roads of the provinces for anything as small as minor criminal activities to as large as beastmen raids. State trooper regiments typically wear the color or colors associated with their provinces or city-states as a means of identification amongst the many imperial armies. although some exceptions are occasionally made. There are no overriding rules governing how, where, or in what proportions these colors are used. Instead, colors differ based on individual regiments' own traditions, their preferred uniforms, the whim of their commanders, the demands of the nobility, or even just the availability of materials and dyes. One regiment might be outfitted entirely in its provincial colours, while another could only bear sleeves or leggings of their province's associated colour hue. Many regiments, however, distinguish themselves by the use of minor details such as sleeves, cuffs, plumes, hats, or collars in a common uniform colour. Some regiments do follow strict uniform regulations, but most units leave individual soldiers to procure their own garbs, resulting in a variety of gear that are often in differing states of wear. Regardless, troops on the march, based in the wilderness or campaigning, are generally more ragtag in appearance as their equipment wears out and replacements must be found. When on the battlefield, each Imperial regiment would usually have supporting detachments of soldiers to help them fight in combat, such as auxiliary units of hand gunners, archers and crossbow men, as well as supporting artillery companies and cavalry squadrons. Each unit has a role to play in the battlefield, such as securing their flanks from enemy attacks, reinforcing the front line with fresh troops, or providing missile fire from supporting regiments of auxiliary units. Alongside these warriors are cadres of mighty war wizards trained by the magisters of the 8 colleges of magic. Such organization and cooperation has made Imperial armies particularly dreaded in the old world. Were it not for the endless wars, famines and corruption that has plagued the Empire's long history, no other nation could ever hope to stop them should they be allowed to concentrate their entire military might into a single, earth-shattering campaign. The Empire Swordsmen. Blades in hand, they thrive in melee at the heart of battle. Empire Swordsmen are some of the most common basic line infantry fielded by the Empire. Swordsmen are expert fencers, equipped with a standard sword and shield and fighting in a loose formation, allowing them to maneuver in close combat. These daring soldiers are often romanticized by Imperial poets as tall, dashing figures, often bravely engaging the best enemy regiments with only their bravery and combat skill, striking an opponent's weak spots while knowing how to defend themselves with their battle-worn shields. This, along with their tremendous skill with the sword and their flexible formation, makes them a tough challenge for even the most skilled opponents, providing the Empire with powerful offensive capability. Truly professional soldiers, swordsmen form the rock of many Imperial battle lines. Soldiers wear highly ornamental half-plate armor that bears the emblem of the Empire, their province, and other personal accessories and talismans. With the Empire housing many of the finest fencing schools within the old world, many have regarded the Empire as having some of the best swordsmen in all of the human kingdoms, and some say that they are even better than the fearsome swordsmen of distant Estalia. Next, the Empire Halberdier. The Empire has a history of facing many foes physically superior to even the strongest humanity has to offer. Even the strongest man may be outmuscled by an orc, while a Minotaur's axe may cleave a swordsman before he ever draws close enough to swing his return blow. Similarly, mankind has often been outnumbered by teeming swarms of foes. Against these enemies, the Empire uses not only fortifications and choke points, but weapons useful in such spaces. Both of these problems have found a common solution in the Imperial Halberdier. Equipped with a fearsome halberd, a long-shafted weapon with a heavy blade and spiked tip, this weapon is capable of smashing through heavy armor and the tough hides of deadly creatures in equal measure. Halberdier regiments are amongst the most numerous infantry type due to the Emperor's requirement that each elector count maintain a standing force of halberdiers because of their strength and versatility on the battlefield. Wearing only a chestplate, these men go to combat without a shield and bravely engage their enemies in a tight formation, using the powerful swipes of their blade to compensate for their lack of armor with bone-crushing force. Such troops are suited for both defense and offense, capable of holding ground in a narrow passage against numerically or physically superior opponents, as well as being the spearhead of a massive Imperial assault. As such, these men are a very common sight on any Imperial battlefield. The Empire's Spearman. The spear is a weapon older than mankind. It is easy to use and requires little training, but is an effective weapon nonetheless. Cheap to produce, easy to use, and especially lethal in large units, it is no surprise that the Empire's spearmen are a common sight among Imperial armies. Equipped with a cheaply manufactured spear, a formation of spearmen makes an excellent defensive unit. Those who charge a well-formed unit of spears are faced with an impassable wall of sharp steel points, providing an anvil for the Imperial army, whilst the hammer strikes the killing blow. With their long reach, each rank of spearmen are able to strike at their enemy, even when they themselves are not within the front ranks. Spearmen are more common in the northern provinces due to the cheapness of the spear's manufacture and the lack of large-scale industry to field and maintain comparatively more expensive troops like the Empire halberdiers and handgunners. In the southern provinces, the longer and heavier pikes are preferred for being ideal in defensive and offensive situations, due to the influence of distant Alia and their preference for pikes. Nevertheless, spearmen regiments are still a common sight amongst the battlefields of the Empire, especially campaigns situated within the north. The Free Company Militia. They might look like an undisciplined rabble to you, Sergeant, but a man fights twice as hard when he's defending home and earth. Free Company Militia is a term that describes the men and women from neighboring towns or villages that have taken up arms, willingly or not, to serve alongside the armies of the Empire and defend the lands of their birth. Whilst the mainstay of the Imperial Army consists entirely of professional soldiers like swordsmen, halberdiers, and spearmen, its armies are often bulked up by a large portion of free company regiments. Some of these regiments consist of mercenaries, but much of it consists of local militias and levied servicemen to fight as a support unit should the need for quantity over quality be required. Many, if not all, of these militias are outfitted with a motley variety of weaponry and armor that are more often than not provided by the individuals themselves. On rare occasions, some of these militia groups consist of retired grizzly veterans who have left the military and settled down in a peaceful life many years ago, and it is their wisdom and courage that has held many militia regiments together. Most of the time, however, these regiments consist of inexperienced villagers with little to no combat training, and can only be readily identified by only a few scraps of tatty clothing, which may sometimes have a resemblance of a uniform of some kind, and often incorporate elements of the state's official colors. Equipped with mostly makeshift armor and weapons, which will include assortments such as bows, spears, swords, clubs, and particularly in rural communities, simple farming equipment like pitchforks or grain skiffs. These militias are often looked upon with distaste by many Empire generals, and seldom use them in the battlefield. Though their lack of conviction for a cause can be questionable, especially during a campaign that these men have little to no business in being in, when the armies of the Empire's foes invade the lands of the Empire, their lack of conviction can grow into zealous devotion in their efforts to ensure that their homes and families shall not suffer a horrifying fate. The Empire Handgunner. Never forget that behind the sights of a gun, there lies a man. He must be trained to use his weapon, just as he would a pike, a broadsword, or a loom. The tools of war are dangerous and fragile things, and black powder makes them more so. The mastery must be taught slowly. Repeat the lessons, and repeat them again. Once on the battlefield, it will be too late for further schooling. If they enter the battle not knowing how to kill, all they will learn is how to be killed. From Heinz Karl Frohmann, Chief Instructor, Sterland State Gunnery School. Handgunners are among the deadliest ranged infantry within the Imperial Army. These state troops are armed with fearsome long-barreled black powder weapons known as handguns, often manufactured by the highly skilled gunsmiths of Nurn. The withering volley of high-velocity lead shot from ranks of handgunners can break the most determined orc warg, or unhorse even a heavily armored Chaos Knight. Handgunners are primarily equipped with handguns, as their name suggests. These long-barrel weapons fire single lead balls at high velocity via a black powder explosion. A shot from a handgun is more powerful than an equivalent arrow and can penetrate armor with ease. However, handguns are somewhat temperamental and, more crucially, require a lengthy reloading drill compared to that of a bowman or crossbowman. Additionally, handgunners must carry black powder on their person, making their duty somewhat more hazardous than that of a less advanced troop. Despite this, handgunners are powerful and effective soldiers, capable of crushing enemy onslaughts. Their modernized way of warfare paves the way for more advanced weapons technology. The Empire Archers. The ability to shoot several arrows per minute means that archers are still far more efficient than more technically advanced skirmish troops. Empire archers have been used in Empire armies since time immemorial. Units of archers are often irregular bands of hunters and trappers that band together to form their own regiments of scouts and support units, and are ready to answer the call to arms at any given time. The northern provinces of the Empire are famous for their bowmen and tend to have a high proportion of archers in their armies, with Hochland having the most celebrated archers of all. Archers are adaptable troops and often fight in a loose skirmish screen, falling back into Imperial ranks when the enemy approaches. Alternatively, archers can also form up into wedge formations, flanked by blocks of infantry, or else are put on rises behind the main battle line. Recently, archers have faced competition from other missile units, such as crossbowmen and handgunners. However, archers still have the advantage of rate of fire. An archer may be able to shoot 6 arrows per minute, while a crossbowman can only fire 1. The greatest archers often form into regiments of elite skirmishers, known as huntsmen. The Empire Crossbowmen. Crossbowmen are an uncommon form of ranged infantry fielded within the armies of the Empire. Crossbows are not very popular in the Empire, though Talian mercenaries are often recruited to augment the firepower of a count's army. Some counts from the southern provinces retain units of crossbowmen as part of their personal household troops. Crossbows may lack the penetrative power of handguns or the rate of fire of standard bows, but they are just as accurate in the hands of an expert. Crossbows have a range longer than that of handguns, but shorter than that of bows. Their main advantage lies in the fact that they are easily produced, and their use is easily learned. The Empire Great Sword. Despite the horrific casualties and many wounds that they suffered during the battle, the Great Swords fought on resolutely, and by battle's end, their white Reich Guard uniforms had been drenched in blood. The Karaborg Great Swords during the Siege of Karaborg. Empire Great Swords form an elite corps of heavily armored infantry who are promoted from the ranks of the Imperial Army for their exceptional skill, bravery, and courage on the battlefield. The Elector Counts always have a regiment of these troops with them at all times, for they act both as a bodyguard regiment and as a reserve force of elite warriors that has the potential to turn the tide of many battles. A regiment of great swords is amongst one of the greatest and most expensive assets within any Imperial army. These men are decked out with extremely expensive dwarf-forged full-plate armor and are armed with massive, two-handed swords called Zweihanders, weapons so powerful that they have the potential to cleave a fully armored knight in two. Due to their expensive equipment and years of irreplaceable training, Empire generals are very hesitant to send these troops into battle. It is only when the entire battle hangs in the balance will these mighty warriors be sent in their droves towards the enemy ranks. However, due to upholding their duties, most great sword regiments are generally used as guards and garrison troops for important castles and fortresses belonging to the Elector Count, and would follow him on many state affairs. On some occasions, the Elector Count would select a champion to lead his great swords into battle. Such an honor is reserved for only the greatest warrior within the regiment. A soldier who is promoted to the ranks of the great swords is required to swear an oath to never step backwards in the face of the enemy. Every great sword regiment upholds this sacred oath, lest they suffer dire punishment, not only to their honor, but also from their own Elector Count. Fortunately, instances of great swords retreating are very rare, and accounts of great swords fighting against impossible odds, even to the last man, are far more common. As a result of their unshakable courage and devotion, great sword troops are often rewarded with double the pay of regular Imperial soldiers, fed the best foods available, and quartered in the most luxurious barracks within the castle walls. Great swords who possess even more courage and heroism than their own comrades are bestowed the greatest honor any Imperial soldier can hope to obtain: knighthood. Such an occasion is extremely rare, however. A knighted greatsword will possess his own estate, and should he wish, be allowed to join one of the famous knightly orders. And to end things off, the Flagellants. Does our most holy father reward those who take the easy road? Does he traffic in temptation? Of course not. Sigma rewards hard work, resolve in the face of temptation, and above all, courage when confronting mortal danger. My friends, the easy path leads to corruption, to damnation, to perdition. Only through suffering can you ever see the glory that is the truth, that is the founder of our glorious empire, that is our divine father, Sigma. From Rolf von Stolden, a flagellant. Flagellants are the names given to those that have lost all hope for a dying world, and now wander the lands in marauding hordes, preaching the end is nigh, and fighting the darkness with a fervor that borders onto insanity. The Empire is a dangerous and cruel place. Wars, plagues and the predation of terrible monsters can destroy whole towns and force their inhabitants to become beggars, vagabonds, and brigands. Most who endure such hardships are hardened by their losses, but some are driven over the edge by their suffering. Many of these disheveled wretches see their plight as a morbid sign that the empire is about to collapse, an irrefutable portent that these are the last desperate days of a dying world. These men revel in their despair, yet they see that the only true way of salvation now is to fight and die in the defense of their gods. Such unfortunates flock like moths to a flame to hear the despairing speeches of lunatic doomsayers, and in their desperation they join these penniless zealots in their rants about lost hope and the end of the world. Led by a prophet of doom, these deluded bands of flagellants roam the empire at will, spreading their gospel of desolation before them. It is a common sight to see groups of fanatical madmen whipping and beating themselves as they travel from village to village, begging for scraps of food as they preach their nightmarish vision of ruin. However, the occasional flagellant prefers to travel alone. When word reaches the flagellants that a battle is brewing, they gather together in anticipation for the end, believing it to be the final hopeful battle between good and evil. Thus, as armies clash, the flagellants throw themselves into the fray in desperate gestures of self-sacrifice and repentance. Although they are mad, flagellants are not cowards. They firmly believe that the end of the world is about to come, and their conviction gives them a courage that borders upon insanity. Indeed, for many are completely fearless, having long since confronted their own vision of the world's ending. Nothing holds terror for them any longer. Their madness gives them the ability to fight anything that stands before them. The Imperial Cavalry. First on the list are the Knights. The so-called Knights of your Empire are barely worthy of the name. It takes more than a lance and steed to make a knight. Do we call the pick riders of the green skins knights when they ride to battle? No. Knighthood is more than the art of fighting from horseback. It is a way of life, a code of behavior, and a daily quest for virtue. It is chivalry, something I fear the cavalrymen of the Empire will never understand. From Sir Guy du Baston, a knight of Bretonnia. And I am eager to discuss knightly virtue further with Sir Guy, or any other Bretonian who cares to call mine into question. My lance and I will shortly put the matter to rest. From Sir Theodoric von Ritterstein, a Knight Panther. The knightly orders of the Empire are noble, heroic brotherhoods of armored warriors who ride into battle atop mighty bordered warhorses and sometimes other more exotic creatures. The noble-born warriors of the Empire do not form part of any state-standing army, for to do so would mean to rub shoulder with the common soldiery. Knights are magnificent figures, clad in gleaming suits of heavy plate armor and armed with weaponry of the finest quality. The sight of a regiment of knights charging full tilt at the enemy is a terrifying prospect for the Empire's foes to face. As the knights thunder onwards, they are likened to an avalanche of steel and muscle, and those enemies not spitted on the end of sharpened lances are crushed beneath the trampling of iron-shod hooves. To become a member of one of the Empire's select brotherhoods of knightly orders, a noble must forsake his feudal responsibilities and rights of inheritance, and then pass a rigorous rite of initiation. There are many of these brotherhoods throughout the Empire. Some are small in size, and their members are recruited from the local aristocracy, such as the Knights Griffon and the Order of the Broken Sword. Other orders restrict their membership to devout worshippers of a particular god. These are often referred to as Knights Templar, and they include such orders as the Black Guard of Mor and the Zealous Knights of Sigmar's Blood. Whilst every knightly order will have a primary temple in one city-state or province, most will also maintain subsidiary temples across the length and breadth of the Empire. The knightly orders of the Empire are organized along strict lines of hierarchy, with every novice trained in martial virtues and the chivalry code until he is ready to take up the mantle of a fully fledged knight. As the warrior attains honor on the battlefield and proves his worth, he will ascend through the ranks of his order and forge himself a warrior's name. The order's veteran knights form its inner circle. These heroic warriors epitomize the warrior virtues of the knightly orders, and they have accomplished mighty feats of arms, slaying their foes on countless battlefields. The Knights of the Inner Circle are the elite of the elite, amongst the best fighting men of the entire Empire. Every Empire Knight bears his rank and order's symbols upon his shield or armor as heraldic devices and other icons of importance and symbolic meaning. The most famous orders in the Empire have histories stretching back centuries, and their chapter houses are hung with ancient banners and battle trophies. The largest and most influential orders are the Reiksguard Knights, the Knights of the White Wolf, the Knights Panther, and of course, the Knights of the Blazing Sun. The Empire Pistolier. Look what that damned arrows did to my doublet. Right, chaps, let's give 'em a taste of hot lead. Charge! From an anonymous pistolier. Pistoliers are the elite light cavalry of the Imperial Army. They specialize in wielding firearms, specifically pistols. They have only come into their own recently, as gunpowder weapons have been relatively unstable until now in the old world. Because of the expense of their weapons and the constant upkeep that pistols and war horses require, noblemen dominate the ranks of the pistoliers. Many young nobles volunteer for the pistoliers in search of glory or in the hopes of making a name. It's like shooting goblins in a gorge. an Imperial marksman's saying. Empire pistoliers are fielded by the armies of the Empire as a form of fast, light reconnaissance cavalry that are equipped with half-plate armor and a brace of pistols to support them in their role as dedicated scouts and skirmishers. The main duty of the pistoliers is to harass the enemy with gunfire and retreat before they could suffer any reprisals. Most of them have a certain affinity when it comes to gunpowder weaponry, with the most talented pistoliers usually hailing from the Imperial Gunnery School, a prestigious institution where they are taught how to handle, maintain, and equip a simple firearm in combat. The rank of a pistolier is mostly reserved for the noble families of the Empire, where young military-minded youths go in order to prepare themselves for the rigors of cavalry warfare within the knightly orders of the Empire. As such, those young yet spirited nobles may gather their friends and form regiments of pistoliers of their own. However, it is far more common for these rash nobles to enlist themselves within the prestigious ranks of the Pistol Corps, a military organization funded and sponsored by the Emperor, the College of Engineers, and several brotherhoods of Imperial Knights. It is from here that these young nobles learn about proper horsemanship and disciplined warfare from the ranks of the Outriders, grizzled veterans paid by the knights to train young nobles in the proper art of war. As such, many pistoliers would often be fighting in open battlefields for the first time in their lives. Due to their luxurious upbringings and hot-headed behavior, they are often disdained by the common soldier as nothing more than flashing flops. However, none could deny that there are still true warriors within the ranks of the Pistol Corps, with tales abound of many young yet spirited pistoliers jumping into the jaws of the enemy with nothing but courage and their prideful arrogance to keep the enemy at bay. These tales are the sole reason why many young nobles are so interested in becoming a pistolier. Such fantasies are often indulged by the fathers of these young nobles as a way of tempering their wild bravado into something more dependable and beneficial for their family and the Empire as a whole. The Empire Outrider. He'd have to be one hell of a shot to get me from the last words of Duke Reinhard of Karlsburg. Empire Outriders are the elite, veteran warriors of an Imperial Pistol Corps squadron, acting as both a drill instructor and commander of a squadron of ill-experienced pistoliers. Unlike the flamboyantly young nobles of a pistolier company, Outriders are rarely of noble birth, but rather are veterans elevated from the ranks of a regular state troop regiment. Sergeants and officers who show an affinity for horsemanship and a talent for training new recruits. Outriders typically wear a heavier, more ornate suit of half-plate armor, a symbol of how a nobleman would pay large sums of money for their sons to be taught the lessons of the art of war. They also tend to sport eccentrically waxed mustaches to better differentiate themselves from their younger and more ill-experienced recruits. The outriders that lead units of pistoliers into battle have the job of reining in their young recruits' excesses and keeping them out of the worst dangers that come from a battlefield. Although this is sometimes a forlorn hope, an outrider's stern gaze and bark orders have prevented more than one foolhardy pistolier from getting himself killed recklessly by the enemy. Outriders see their younger pistolier counterpart as promising if intemperate youngsters who simply lack the military discipline of a typical soldier. Despite much grumbling about not showing their elders any respect, outriders are always extremely proud when one of their own recruits are inducted into the ranks of a prestigious knightly order. When amassed in large numbers, outriders generally form into separate regiments of the same rank, sometimes to show their recruits exactly how it's done, but also as a way to display their own martial discipline to any rich nobleman within the army that might be looking for an experienced instructor to tutor his own sons. As the Pistol Corps is funded in part by the Imperial Engineers School, outriders are generally equipped with deadly repeater handguns, weapons capable of unleashing a devastating storm of lead at long range. The leader of the outriders, inevitably the keenest shot in the regiment, will often be armed with an even more outlandish weapon befit of his status, and sometimes even gifted to him by a patron master engineer. And of course, the most famous of them all, the Demigryph Knights. They rode their powerfully agile steeds up the side of the valley, arcing around and down upon the flanks of the green-skin horde. There, they waged a cull of such unremitting violence that it broke the deadlock and ultimately carried the day from a Knight of the Vengeful Sun during the Battle of Ghoul Pass. Demigryph Knights are amongst the most powerful heavy armored shock cavalry ever fielded within the armies of the Empire. Although the knights themselves are expert cavalrymen, the mounts that they ride are what truly distinguishes them in the heat of battle. These massive war beasts are ferocious and powerfully built, standing larger than any Imperial warhorse, and are far more bloodthirsty in their murderous assault than any other creature of such noble heritage. With a thick layer of armored plates overlapping over powerful sinews of muscular claws, and a beak so powerful that it can dismember a fully armored knight in two. These demigryphs are reserved for only the mightiest of Imperial knights. Despite their fearsome reputation, demigryph knights are relatively rare, as the beasts themselves are far too few in numbers to mass produce, and the breeding programs meant to supply the Empire with more have been met with grisly consequences. As such, the only way to tame such a beast is to go to the darkest reaches of the Reichwald forest. At the heart of this great forest lurk many foul and ancient beasts of many ages past, but none are so noble and majestic in their heritage as the prides of demigryphs who ruthlessly claim this patch of territory as their own. Amongst a select few of the knightly order, an aspiring knight's final quest is to capture and tame a mighty demi-griff and break it to his will. Unsurprisingly, many fail upon this task and are torn to bloody ribbons as a consequence. However, those that do manage to tame a demigriff are given great praise, for not only has the knight gained a mighty and loyal companion, but he has also given his knightly order even greater prestige in having such a beast within their arsenal. Such a reward comes at a heavy price, for a knight would be scarred for all his life with the cuts and wounds inflicted by his own mount. However, these knights wear the scars like a badge of honor, for they set themselves apart from their horse-mounted brethren, bearing testament to their own personal bravery and martial ability. In turn, demigriffs are forever loyal to their masters once they have earned their trust, with tales abound of loyal demigriffs stalking their prey to avenge the death of their noble rider. When the call to war is sounded, these demigriff knights would form into their own respected squadrons of heavy shock cavalry. When driven to a charge, their demigriff would start its attack with a pounce on the enemy, which is then followed by a series of swift swipes from his muscular claws. Such an impact can cause the enemy to be crushed into the floor or be thrown many yards away. Unlike the common warhorse, a demigriff does not attempt to overwhelm its prey by means of a great charge, but rely on its own brute strength and sheer size to take his prey down. With its monstrous endurance, a demigriff would fight for hours, ferociously rendering flesh into scraps on the floor with claw and beak. With the close confines of such a battle and the sheer size of his demigriff mount, the traditional cavalry lance is often replaced with a cavalry halberd to give them the ideal reach and power to crush their enemies. The Imperial Artillery. First on the list are the Imperial Great Cannons. These immense guns form the backbone of an artillery battery, hurling solid balls of iron into the enemy, ripping through ranks and devastating formations. Armor is no protection against a cannonball, and the effect a well-aimed salvo can have on tightly packed regiments cannot be underestimated. An excerpt from Machineries of Destruction, the manifold methods of maiming the mass and the mob on the field of battle, by Master Engineer Hallar Hansleben of Wissenland. Great cannons are among the largest of the mobile cannons built and employed by the armies of the Empire, and are used extensively as the main artillery. The great cannons of the Empire were first invented by the ingenious designers of the College of Engineers. This cannon is one of the most successful weapons ever invented by the Empire, able to sow terror and destruction upon any battlefield. Their thunderous fire has the potential to send large iron balls hammering into tightly packed ranks of enemy infantry, with even the mightiest of creatures unable to survive a direct, clean shot from these iron behemoths. The ultimate power of the Empire Great Cannon was demonstrated at the Siege of Middenheim, when Master Gunner Pomhart von Steyr decapitated a rampaging dragon with a single, well-placed shot. Though the cannon may at times malfunction, or in some cases even explode, should an experienced master engineer take command of the cannon crew, it is certain that their shots have the potential to turn the tides of many battlefields. Alternatively, a cannon crew may choose to fire grapeshot. Rather than a single ball, this type of ammunition is a canvas sack full of small musket ball-sized projectiles. Upon impact, the bag tears, scattering the deadly projectiles over a wider area. Because they are so large and heavy, cannons must be moved around by draught ponies. This means that a cannon may not be redeployed during battle. Cannons must be set up before battle in a position where they can inflict maximum damage. Typically, this is on higher ground, for this means increased range and better vision for the crew. The Empire Mortar. In capable hands, mortars are very effective at blasting great holes open in enemy formations. The effect a successful strike can have on an enemy is marked. There is nothing like having to march over the bloody, twisted remains of former comrades to put the wind up a foe. An excerpt from Machineries of Destruction. Empire mortars are one of the artillery pieces created by the Imperial Gunnery School. Compared to the great cannons, mortars are much shorter and about equally heavy, but both can have devastating effects. Mortars are designed to fire in an arch, and instead of solid iron balls, they fire hollow shells filled with black powder, with a fuse attached. The shell then explodes, many a time, landing in the heart of the enemy formation, blasting red-hot, razor-sharp shrapnel in all directions, skipping through whole ranks of enemy warriors. Firing a mortar is always a tense moment, for the quality of fuses is highly variable, and it is not unknown for one to burn through before the crew has finished loading the shell. The best case scenario is that the crew will have to waste time removing the dud shell. The worst case scenario, the mortar explodes, killing the crew. As a result, mortar crews tend to be superstitious and carry a large number of good luck charms, hoping they will not meet an unlucky fate. Mortars are commonly used in sieges. Their high arc of fire and explosive shells are ideal for firing on or past castle walls. The Hell Blaster Volley Cannon. Master Engineer Volker von Meinkampf found inspiration watching students reloading at the Imperial Gunnery School. He had a revelation. More barrels equals more shots equals more lethality. He soon produced the first repeating handgun, von Meinkampf's whirling cavalcade of death, and pistol, von Meinkampf's micro mainspring of multitudinous precipitation of pernicious lead. Not content to rest on those laurels, he then created the enormous 9-barreled cannon, the Hell Blaster Volley Gun, which is utterly lethal to enemies and, all too often, its crew. From Great Engineers of the Empire by Lady Theodora Holzenauer, an engineer and journalist. The Hellblaster Volley Gun is one of the most infamous black powder weapons ever invented. Its devastating firepower able to tear apart an entire regiment of enemy troops in one thunderous volley. Maintain distance when supervising gunnery crew to ensure safe observation. An excerpt from Machineries of Destruction. The lethal creation of the deranged Imperial Engineer von Meinkopf, this weapon's terrifying reputation has since spread to all corners of the old world. Its 9 separate barrels are divided into 3 decks and are turned by means of a central crank, firing around 3 shots per deck, which would shatter the enemy in hail of miniature cannonballs. Hellblaster crews may choose to fire all 3 decks in quick succession, or to load and fire the decks one after another. Either method has advantages. Even heavily armored Chaos Warriors can be torn to shreds by a single volley, though with such devastating power comes a greater risk to the artillery crew. Hellblaster volley guns are notoriously prone to sudden, cataclysmic explosions. As a result, those crewmen who operate a machine that is so prone to catastrophically blowing them up tend to be paired up with the priests of Mor. The Hellblaster volley gun was invented by Master Engineer Volker von Meinkopf, who also invented the repeater handgun and repeater pistol. And some bonus trivia. During his time at the Imperial Engineers School, long before Volker von Meinkopf, Leonardo da Miragliano created his own version of the Hellblaster volley cannon, which was even more devastating, albeit less reliable than the actual model. To end things off, the Hellstorm Rocket Battery. The Hellstorm Rocket Battery is an experimental artillery piece used by the Empire of Man as a means to shower the enemy with a hail of explosive rocket munitions. After watching the spectacular fireworks of a Cathayan emissary to Altdorf, Master Engineer Hermann Falkstein was inspired to transform this Eastern technology into a weapon. His early research infamously blew apart entire laboratories of the Imperial School of Engineers, but the perpetually soot-blackened engineer never lost faith that his designs had a military value and succeeded in creating a deadly, if unpredictable, weapon. Falkstein's original rockets were wildly inaccurate, madly corkscrewing weapons that had no chance whatsoever of hitting anything other than, eventually, the ground. Further refinements such as fins, long sticks added to the base of a rocket, and a launch carriage to aid aiming further improved stability and accuracy. At least a little bit. However, when these rockets do land on their intended target, the results are devastating. Entire regiments can be blown apart by a series of earth-shattering explosive impacts. After Elector Count Boris Todbringer was almost hit by an errant barrage, they were dubbed Hellstorm rockets after the colorful language he used to reprimand the unfortunate crewmen. One of the most famous Hellstorm rocket batteries is the Sunmaker, which was designed shortly before his death by the scatterbrained Talabheim alchemist Jürgen Bügelstrauss. The Empire War Machines. First up, the Steam Tank. From great range, a steam tank launches powerful shots of armor-piercing cannon fire with tremendous stopping power. Steam tanks are monstrous, smoke-belching war machines that rumble towards the enemy and fire deadly cannonballs from their steam-powered guns to crush all those that stand against the Empire. They were first designed by the famed inventor Leonardo da Miragliano, who adapted the use of dwarven steam technology to power the pistons and gears that drive the wheels of the steam tank forward. In times of war, the Imperial Engineers School may sanction the use of these rare and valuable machines should the fate of the Empire of Man hang in the balance. The steam tank is powered by a pressurized boiler that siphons steam through pipes and pistons. All existing tanks were designed by the famed genius Chilean inventor Leonardo da Miragliano. The steam tanks are the most confounding puzzle known to the Imperial Engineers School, for after the inventor's death, the secrets of their construction were lost with him, and engineers have so far been unable to successfully construct any new steam tanks. Only 12 tanks were built, all with varying configurations. Only 8 steam tanks remain, the lost 4 having been destroyed during testing or in battle. The war engines are somewhat unreliable, and only rarely can all 8 be persuaded to run for a single battle. As the steam tank is brought to bear, the advance of these iron-clad behemoths is terrifying to behold, as arrows ricochet from the armored hull and enemy warriors are crushed beneath its immense bulk. During battle, the tank is commanded and driven by a senior engineer who manages and directs the steam from the boiler to the tank's mechanisms. Should too much pressure be allowed to build in the boiler, it may rupture with catastrophic effects. The most common steam tank variant is armed with a steam-powered cannon in its hull and a steam gun mounted in its turret. Though the steam cannon is smaller than the great cannons used by the Imperials, the maneuverability and protection of the steam tank more than compensates for the main cannon's comparatively shorter range and diminished firepower. The different variants. First, the Alter Kamerad, or Old Fellow in Reichsspiel, a configuration armed with a hull-mounted steam-operated Hell Blaster volley gun and a turret-mounted steam gun. Sigmar's Hammer, a configuration without armaments, used as a ram. Unfehlbar, or Unerring in Reichsspiel, an open-topped configuration, armed with a mortar and 2 swivel guns. Von Zeppel, named after the designing engineer. A configuration without hull-mounted armament, carrying a platform crammed with engineers carrying experimental weapons like the Hochland long rifle, a blunderbuss, a repeater handgun, a special form of halberd, a massive morning star, and a man-catcher. And now onto the most famous steam tanks. The Conqueror, one of the first steam tanks built. Its hull striking ceremony held in the year 2050 IC. Other steam tanks with the same armament, the main cannon and steam gun, are often referred to as Conqueror class. The Deliverance entered service in the year 2035 IC, and its many battlefield performances have made it legendary. Deliverance caused untold carnage to the foe during the Great War against Chaos by newly elected Emperor Magnus the Pious. The Emperor's Wrath. Recently been to the Engineers College in Altdorf for overhauling. It has been repaired and refitted back to a Conqueror class configuration. Now returned to active duty, the Emperor's Wrath has been instrumental in aiding Graf Boris Todbringer's ongoing battles in the Dracwald forest. The Miragliano, piloted by von Streihof. The Indomitable, destroyed by Dragon Skulex the Great in the Battle of Volganhof. And the all-reliable, hastily repaired tank that single-handedly held back a Chaos Horde during the Battle of Kriegfield Castle. The War Altar of Sigmar. The War Altar of Sigmar is a magnificent and awe-inspiring golden battle altar that invokes the faith of Sigmar to all those loyal sons of the Empire answering the call to war. Commissioned by Magnus the Pious after his ascension, the War Altar is a colossal chariot, ornate and gleaming with a towering effigy of a golden griffon carried upon it, crafted by the most skilled artisans in the Empire. This statue was ceremoniously blessed in the Temple of Sigmar in Altdorf with the blood of the Grand Theogenist and Emperor Magnus themselves. The Golden Griffon has thus ever been a source of great, and some say divine, aura of power. An Archlector of Sigmar can draw forth this power with the sheer conviction of his faith and unleash a blinding white light. For creatures that are bound to the mortal plane by means of dark magic, this light is an anathema to them, and they are utterly scorched by its touch, bursting into flames and crumbling into dust in but an instant. Against the forces of chaos, where the danger of spiritual malaise and moral corruption is as great a danger as death, the Grand Theogenist may deem it necessary to unleash the War Altar to battle once again. He may trust this solemn duty to one of his trusted Archlectors under his command, or in times of a particular crisis, ride it to war himself. The sight of the altar inspires acts of heroic bravery in the forces of the Empire, steeling their resolves to face the manifold horrors that the world throws at them. The War Altar has seen battle on hundreds of battlefields and bears the scars of enemy blows as proudly as any soldier of Sigmar. It is the duty of each Grand Theogenist to tend to his holy relic. They renew scrolls of benedictions, repair sigils of faith, and attach new artifacts and holy icons to the war altar's redoubtable frame. These modifications are made completely at the discretion of the incumbent Grand Theogenist. As such, the war altar has reflected the personality of each man who held that grand title over the centuries. In the time of Grand Theogenist Richter, a fiery orator who sought to bring the light of Sigmar to the darkest corner of the Empire, the war altar sported a pair of burning braziers. Volkmar the Grim instead affixed the mighty horn of Sigismund to the chariot's sturdy carriage, so that his enemies would tremble at his approach. Whatever improvements are made, the golden griffon mounted atop the war altar remains untouched, forever standing proudly as a symbol of the Empire's might. The Luminarch of Hysh. Each orb is infused with the essence of one of the 8 magical winds, and it is even whispered that the portion of Lord Teclis's own power is bound within every one of them. The orbs of Hysh radiate a blinding white light so intense that they have been mistaken for miniature suns. The Luminarch of Hysh is a large and complex arcane battle altar created by the wizards of the Light Order to be used as a potent magical war machine. Within each battle altar lies one of the legendary Orbs of Sorcery, an ancient magical artifact that is imbued with one of the 8 winds of magic. The orb that is embedded within the center of the machine acts as the catalyst, drawing upon the magical energies of Hysh to summon a devastating ray of soul fire known famously as Solheim's Bolt of Illumination. Each Luminarch is crewed by several acolytes of the Light Order, who oversee the well-being of the machine while a head wizard directs the beam. Though slow at first, the dim light within the machine will eventually grow, increasing in intensity and power, until so much energy is charged within the machine that it emits a blinding light which leaps through the Luminarium's arcane optics, manifesting in a destructive beam of soul fire so intense that it could vaporize anything in its path. As the energy is being released, an excess of light energy would leak out of the machine, creating a shimmering aura that grants those warriors nearby with magical protection. Warriors so blessed with this magical protection have found enemy sword strokes turned aside by a magical force, and enemy arrows suddenly combusting in midair moments before impact. The Light College has very precious few of these Luminarchs left, as these machines need an orb of sorcery in order to function properly. Such safeguarding of these machines is often commonplace, as deploying even a single one of these marvels into battle provides an ultimate dilemma within the Light Order's hierarchy. Not only are the orbs used as a magical weapon, they are also a critical component within the Light College's magical security system. It is the duty of the Light Order to safeguard the treasure trove of ancient and evil artifacts that is buried within the vaults beneath the Light College. The removal of an orb to be used for a Luminarch decreases the vault's magical potency, which would risk the evil hidden away beneath the college to slither away into the darkness and bring about another doom for all mankind. The Celestial Hurricanum. The Celestial Hurricanum is a large and complex arcane battle altar created by the wizards of the Celestial College to be used as a potent magical war machine. The Celestial Hurricanum is bolted within a massive wheeled chariot pulled by two powerful Imperial warhorses and watched over by the acolytes of the Celestial Patriarch. The orb that is embedded within the center of the machine acts as the catalyst, drawing upon the magical energies of Azir to summon a magical storm known simply as the Storm of Shemtek. As the orb begins its manifestation, a very weak and chilling wind quietly swirls around the machine, growing in size and tempo until it eventually grows into a thunderous hurricane. As the acolytes oversee the device, the head wizard would enchant the spells needed to direct the magical energies towards the enemy. The magical properties of the Storm of Shemtek are of a unique nature, for the orb has the mystical ability to alter weather patterns in the sky and shower the enemy with a barrage of lightning bolts or a thunderous hail of massive icicle shards that can shear the flesh from the bone. On rare occasions, if the acolytes perform the spell correctly and achieve a perfect alignment, the machine has the power to unleash a fiery comet streaking through the sky and make it slam directly within the very heart of the enemy horde. As the device continues its murderous barrage of carnage, some magical energies would leak out of the machine, often afflicting Imperial troops with unnatural visions of the imminent future. These small magical gifts have given some Imperial soldiers precise predictions of enemy movements, allowing them to easily dodge blows that would cleave a man in two. When not used for battle upon an arcane altar, these orbs are used by the wizards as a means to calculate and observe natural phenomenon within the universe. The orb allows the wizards to see the constellations much more clearly, giving the wizards the ability to correctly interpret the many futures the Empire has within its long, hard destiny. Such predictions have many times before saved the Empire, and in fact, the entire old world, from imminent doom. And it is thanks to the tireless work of these wizards that these catastrophes have been averted. And at last, the Empire War Wagon. Although gradually becoming obsolete due to considerable advances in technology, there is still something inherently reliable about a horse-drawn chariot literally brimming with death. The Empire War Wagon is an extremely heavy version of a chariot, a mobile, armored battle tower with a crew of 6 warriors, pulled by 2 sturdy warhorses. The high walls of the tower protect its crew from arrows and attacks from the ground. War wagons are a movable platform from which it either transports Empire soldiers through the battlefield or provides a vantage point for units of archers, crossbowmen, and handgunners to shoot the enemy. Its crew can also be armed with a variety of experimental weaponry from the arsenal of the Imperial Gunnery School. War wagons can install a piece of artillery into its tower, which provides the artillery with adequate speed and the Empire Army with devastating firepower. As of today, The use of war wagons within the battlefields of the Empire is now obsolete. However, it has been known that war wagons are refitted to serve as either an arcane battle altar or a war altar of Sigmar. In the past, war wagons varied greatly in their size, with some war wagons being only as large as an oversized hay cart, while others were the size of an Empire fortress. As of now, war wagons have been replaced with the newer and more heavily armored steam tank. The Imperial Lords. First up, the Empire General. I can see in your eyes that you fear this enemy. I can see in your eyes that you wonder how we can fight such terrible monsters. Men of the Empire, I have the answer. We fight them with our steel. We fight them with our courage. But above all, we fight them with our faith in Sigmar. From Magnus the Pious, a former general of the Empire's armies. Empire generals are amongst the highest commanding officers within an Imperial army, second only in command to an Elector Count or the Emperor himself. They are usually drawn from powerful Imperial nobles and veteran military commanders, up to and including the Elector Counts themselves. To command an army requires the courage to send men to their deaths, without doubt or hesitation. The armies of the Empire are led by those warriors, usually members of the Imperial nobility, or even, in rare cases, Emperor Karl Franz himself, trained to direct their forces as a swordsman wields his blade. As with all men, however, these commanders can differ in their levels of skill and courage, with some, like the extraordinarily fierce Elector Count of Middenheim, Boris Todbringer, embodying the unwavering valor of the people of Sigmar Heldenhammer. Others are little more than high-born fops, yet still possess the right to command men in battle because of an accident of birth. The castles of these generals are hung with banners from ancient times that were once born into battle during the glorious days of their noble ancestors. Especially wealthy Imperial nobles may even own a banner that has been woven with powerful enchantments, and such works of magic are proudly carried into battle despite the poor reputation witchery has in the Empire in general. The Empire has always been a dangerous land, and never more so than at the present time, with marauding beastmen, orc tribes, and even rival Imperial nobles pillaging its towns and slaughtering its people, often with impunity. The Elector Counts must stand against such foes, though in practice it is not feasible for them to personally command every one of the forces that must be dispatched in their names. Command is often delegated to a trusted soldier considered to be an honorable leader of men, and this officer will lead the province's troops into battle. Of course, there are always exceptions to every rule, and some of the more militant counts, such as Valmir von Raukov of Ostland, have a great love for the clash of steel and the roar of the cannons. These leaders take to the field of battle whenever they can, Most of the men appointed by the Elector Count to lead their province's armies will also be nobles of the Empire, such as Aldebrand Ludenhof of Hochland, educated in martial pursuits from an early age, hunting beastmen in the imperial forests and engaging in falconry and swordsmanship. Others are commoners who have risen through the ranks as a result of their ability on the field, perhaps having first stood in the battle line themselves wielding a bloody halberd or great sword. These officers vary greatly in rank, depending on the size of the force they lead, and are usually known within the Empire as marshals, generals, or sometimes simply commanders. Regardless of their social status, they will be tested veterans of many years of experience in soldiering, having spent most of their lives practicing the arts of war in defense of their besieged homelands. Generals of the Empire are varied in the arms and armor they like to wield and wear. Some make use of melee weapons, while others prefer ranged weapons like the longbow, crossbow, or firearms like the pistol. The most impressive of generals can wield the mighty Drakvald Runefang sitting in the Imperial Vault. Generals of the Empire can choose to wear light armor, heavy armor, or even dwarf-forged full plate armor if they prefer wading head first into action. They can bolster this already strong defense by equipping a shield. While most ride powerful warhorses into battle, some of the greatest nobles of the Empire who serve as generals for the Elector Counts ride winged Imperial Pegasi into combat. Or they may even ride griffons like the Emperor himself, their enchanted banners streaming out behind them in the wind. Such a spectacle is always an enormous morale booster for Imperial troops. The Huntsman Generals. A unique variant of Empire General, Huntsman Generals are veterans of many scouting parties. They are the most experienced among the Empire's elite huntsmen, and therefore the best candidates to lead. Experts at taking down large enemies from a distance, they are commonly equipped with enchanted missiles known as arrows of Akshi. These arrows will kill, of course, but are mainly used to cause a disorientating, explosive spectacle to unnerve the enemy. The Imperial Wizard Lord. All wizards are war wizards, by the very definition of their being. Every single one that we might see upon the streets of Altdorf, or coming to and for their college buildings, are powder kegs, simply awaiting a match. From Lord Melched Eisener of Altdorf. A wizard lord is one of the most powerful practitioners of the arts of magic amongst the race of men. Trained as masters of one of the 8 laws of magic at the Imperial Colleges of Magic in Altdorf, arcane power courses through their veins and lurks behind their eyes like the thunder before a storm. The services of a wizard are always much sought after by the Elector Counts for their armies, as they often face foes in battle who employ potent shamans or fell sorcerers of the ruinous bowers. A wizard lord is a true master of his craft, an individual who has come to embody one of the 8 winds of magic within his own body, and has often spent many decades training other wizards to be in their particular law at the colleges of magic. Only the most powerful Imperial armies are normally able to employ a wizard lord, and wizard lords often lead teams of their fellow magi into combat. Only the most dire of threats to the Empire can get a wizard lord to leave the comfort of his laboratory in the colleges of magic to face the difficulties and endless frustrations of the field. Once on the field, they are the masters of the battlefield, able to send lightning bolts from the sky, massive infernos hurling towards their vile enemies, or even, in some cases, send a massive meteorite from the very heavens, crashing molten rock upon those who dare to defy the glorious Empire's realm. Very few armies can withstand a battle against a wizard lord, for they also bring in a conclave of their own apprentices and magisters that can bring in only more mayhem on the battlefield. And now, a few little-known facts. Those that practice magic for any length of time find that it slowly but surely begins to alter their perception of reality. It may start with simple things such as colors becoming more vivid or hearing whispered voices in the wind, but over time it will lead to a fundamental change in the Magister's mind. By the time a wizard attains the rank of Lord, he is irrevocably infused with magic, the essence of it seeping into the very marrow of his bones and trickling down into the darkest corners of his psyche. Such an altered perception can result in unusual behavior, and as all who deal with such powerful wizards know, their mannerisms are more than mere eccentricities. The wizard lord will often stare into the middle distance, muttering under his breath or making strange hand gestures as if in constant dialogue with an unseen force, a consequence of looking constantly into the beyond. Sometimes it is hard for a wizard lord to focus on the present, as his mind wanders back and forth in time, or is distracted by the colourful flow of magic that caresses the object he should be concentrating on. Of course, in moments of urgency, a wizard can shake off his reverie, and the source of his distraction becomes the tool with which he forges his great power. The call to war. When a wizard's power reaches its peak, and he attains the highest ranks within the colleges of magic, he also takes on a sacred duty to use his power to protect the Empire in times of strife. Members of the colleges of magic understand that they were created and are allowed to prosper in order to protect the Empire from those that would destroy it. So, in times of war, the Emperor calls upon his most powerful wizards to march to battle alongside his armies and use their gifts to strike down his foes. It is a duty that wizard lords accept as part of the price of their power, and one that most perform willingly. Of course, this duty to the Emperor can come in many forms, and while the most common is service in times of war, it can sometimes manifest in more subtle duties. Wizard lords not averse to open warfare might be expected to pay a tithe of potions or magical artifacts to the Emperor to aid his forces in battle, or might agree to raise some of their apprentices as battle mages, wizards specifically trained to devastate the Emperor's enemies with destructive battlefield powers. The Arch-Lectors. His is the grim unending task of uprooting and shattering evil in all its forms. Archlectors are powerful warrior priests who serve under the high priests of their respective churches. Apart from high priests such as the Jarl Ulrich and Grand Theogenist, Archlectors represent the ultimate rank that can be achieved within the Holy Orders. Ostensibly, they must be the wisest, most devout, and most accomplished members of their faith, eminent personages even among the great and the good. They must lead the cult through perilous times. The future of their gods' followers in the world is in their hands. Needless to say, such responsibility is a heavy burden. Archlectors are often already aged when they attain their position. However, this is not a position that a priest can achieve simply by serving his time and keeping out of trouble. Sometimes younger, energetic priests are recognized for their talents and given the rank of lector, or, in unusual cases, archlector. Most cults cannot afford to squander what talent they have, and the old world is not the sort of place in which complacency and seniority trumps skill, devotion, and talent. Archlectors usually represent a territory or an important city, a territory that can be as large as a province, or even several provinces. They have the final say on religious matters that arise in their territory and are answerable to none save the high priest of their order and the emperor himself. Orders within a cult might be represented by either a lector or archlector, and this gives a good indication of the status of that order. To end things off, the Imperial Grand Master. Reiksguard Knights, your Emperor is calling. Death or glory awaits us, but if we die, we will die as warriors, with swords in hand, and there is no better death than that. From Court Helborg, the Grand Master of the Reiksguard Knights. Grand Masters are the highest ranking knights within a knightly order, commanding the complete allegiance of all its members. To lead admirable knights into honorable combat against the chaos is a credit to their commander, and to stand and lead such a band as you is an honored blessing, as if from the gods themselves. From an anonymous Grand Master. A Grand Master is a warrior and leader of unparalleled valor, having fought in dozens of battles, and whose military prowess is beyond question. An Elector Count can request that a knightly order fight alongside his army, but the decision to ride out lies solely with the Grand Master himself. This makes the Grand Master a very powerful ally, and great care is taken not to offend them. Each Grand Master is a paragon of knightly virtue, and is not only one of the most fearsome warriors in the old world, but also a legendary commander and leader of men. They are rare in number, for even amongst those dedicated individuals who have the skill and strength of mind to become a knight of the inner circle, few have what it takes to reach the pinnacle of knighthood. A Grand Master is always at the forefront of an army when it marches to war, and is usually among the most trusted of military advisors and generals, and when not engaged in warfare, is often charged with planning for it. A Grand Master of a Templar Order is often a leading personality within a religious cult as well, commanding total loyalty from its warriors. When an Elector Count petitions a knightly order for aid, it is sometimes a condition that the Grand Master himself take command of the army. Most Elector Counts are only too happy for a general of such superlative ability to lead his soldiers, though this has not always been the case, and ego, ambition, or sheer lunacy has sometimes brought unfortunate consequences.